Now, one of the things you need to understand about lawsuits, in order to get judgments brought against you and get wiped out, do you have to be guilty of anything? Please understand, you do not have to be guilty of anything. In today's lawsuits, you only have to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, or be associated with the wrong person at the wrong time, or even, heaven forbid, just have money. Any one of those three things can lead to a lawsuit that can wipe you out. His father did nothing wrong, but was involved in 3 separate lawsuits, and they were evicted from their family home 3 separate times in about a 4-year period. The last lawsuit's an interesting story. His next door neighbor came over and said, "Mr. Mitton, can I borrow your dump truck to haul some dirt into my backyard?" And Mr. Mitton, being the good neighbor, said, "Absolutely." What happened, however, was that the dump truck ended up in somebody's living room, and guess who got sued for it? So now you know what I'm talking about. It was so devastating to the Mitton family that he says that when he was only about 8 to 12 years of age when all this was happening, it really left a big traumatic emotional scar in the family. Really some bad times. He says by the time he became a teenager, somebody gave him a small gift, a little, like a diary, a little journal of some sort. He says he remembers writing in that journal one day the following. He says, "When I grow up, I will learn to make it so that no one will ever take another dime from me again." I've often thought how sad that was. Instead of saying, "When I grow up, I want to be a policeman," or "I'm going to be a doctor," or whatever, a pilot, he's sitting here saying, "When I grow up, I'm going to learn to make it so no one will ever take another dime from me again." And I guess it's to you and I's benefit that he kept his promise. Do you know that when he went back to school, when he graduated from college and he went on to law school, he discovered an amazing thing. We didn't have a lawsuit epidemic in this country, and they didn't even teach it in law school. He was the first attorney in the United States of America to write his thesis on lawsuits. But he learned how to make it so that no one would take another dime from him again, nor his parents, nor his family, and then his clients. And years later, when we erupted into a lawsuit epidemic in this society, somebody said, "You know what? I know somebody who knows all about that stuff." And without him ever asking for it, he became by default the father of asset protection. Now, when he went to law school and he was learning how to make it so that no one would ever take another dime from him again, he came across limited partnerships. It was very interesting to him that limited partnerships had been around since 1916. He discovered that decades of court cases led him to believe that perhaps the limited partnership would therefore be the solution to the lawsuit epidemic. But there were some challenges, and that's why I'm telling you this whole story. One of the challenges was that limited partnerships were not started in 1916 because of lawsuits. We didn't have a lawsuit epidemic in then either. What we had was an income tax epidemic. I think maybe I alluded to this yesterday. You need to understand that when the founding fathers founded this country, they were familiar with thousands of years of civilizations all across this country. They were trying to put together the formula for peace, prosperity, and happiness that included freedom in this country, and they had such a huge amount of information they didn't know how to assimilate it all, but that was their goal. But one of the things that they seemed to find to be at the common denominator that destroyed nations was the following. They found out that giving too much power to the federal government in every case destroyed people's freedoms. And one of the biggest things that gives government power is money. And so the founding fathers said it would be absolutely critical to not ever let the federal government ever collect taxes from private citizens. And so they even included it in the Constitution. It's in Article 1, Section 9, Clause 4, specifically forbidding the federal government from ever collecting taxes from individuals. Because they said if you ever do that, it will lead to massive corruption, fraud, and waste. Okay. So what happened is that we went for about 130 years. It's not a political thing I'm saying here. It's just a story. What happened is we literally followed that formula for over 130 years. But starting in the early 1900s, some very powerful people in this country decided that they wanted a difference of opinion. And so they decided and proposed that we should start having the government have taxes, income taxes from individuals. But it was prohibited in the Constitution. So it meant that they had to make a major change to the Constitution. And that is exactly what happened. In 1913, on February the 25th, as I recall, in 1913, the states adopted the 16th Amendment, which gave the power to the federal government to now collect taxes. What year was that? 1913. Does it make sense that by 1916 we had a major income tax epidemic in this country? That is why limited partnerships were started. Mr. Mitton discovered that limited partnerships were not started for lawsuit purposes, they were for income tax purposes. And so the legalese language that permeated throughout that document was all oriented towards income tax reduction. But because of all of the decades of court cases that Mr. Mitton studied while he was learning how to make it so no one would take another dime from him again, he figured that with some major modifications in the language of the limited partnership, it might be the solution to lawsuits as well, and he turned out to be correct. But in being called the father of asset protection, he's also called the father of the limited partnership, because he figured out how to make that work for you to make you really unattractive to lawsuits. And that's why I told you earlier that he made almost 40 to 50 major paragraphical changes in that limited partnership you don't find in the average limited partnerships of today. The problem is that most of the limited partnerships on the shelves of the average law firms in today contain the early legalese language from the early 1916 income tax reduction limited partnerships, not the lawsuit protection ones. So it's very important to use the right ones. But the reason I went through this whole story is to give you a lot of background as to how we ended up with this material. First of all, you need to know that limited partnerships did not fall off the banana boat yesterday. They've been around since 1916, but went through some major modifications. And the second thing you had to learn about limited partnerships is that they're not all created the same. The legalese language makes a huge difference as to where we're going.